Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we are going to crack open Crime and Punishment. And let me tell you, it's a wild ride. We're talking murder, morality, poverty, you name it. It's all jammed into this book.
Oh, absolutely. It just pulls you right in, makes you think about what you would do under some pretty extreme circumstances.
So front and center in this book is our main guy, Raskolnikov. He's a former student. And we see him right away just completely crushed by poverty.
It's not just poverty, though, right? It's the kind of poverty that really grinds you down. Dostoevsky paints a very vivid picture of that struggle, like selling his father's watch for almost nothing just to scrape by.
It's so real, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he's constantly relying on his mom and sister for help. But even they're barely keeping their heads above water. You can just feel that pressure building on him.
Exactly. And then there's the awful murder he commits. He tries to justify it by saying the pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, is a louse, a harmful person. Even argues that her wealth could be used for good.
It's a really tough pill to swallow, this idea that he gets to decide who lives and dies. But his whole extraordinary man theory comes into play here.
Right. He believes some people are just, above conventional morality, destined to do great things. And of course, he sees himself as one of those people, capable of acting for the greater good, even if it means breaking the law.
So unsettling. But Dostoevsky doesn't let him off the hook at all. After the murder, we watch Raskolnikov just unravel completely, mentally and emotionally.
The guilt is just eating him alive. He's having nightmares, he's paranoid, and he can't even focus on the simplest thing.
Almost like his punishment starts way before any legal consequences come into play.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how Dostoevsky contrasts Raskolnikov's experience with another character, Sonia Marmeladov.
Sonia and her family are also living in some seriously desperate poverty, even worse than Raskolnikov's.
We meet her father, Marmeladov, a drunkard who can't seem to hold down a job, and then we find out Sonia has been forced into prostitution to support her family. Just a heartbreaking situation.
And yet, she still holds on to her faith and shows so much compassion for others. It's incredible.
She represents this unwavering moral compass of belief in goodness and forgiveness, which is so different from Raskolnikov's more, I guess you could say, nihilistic worldview.
It's almost like we're seeing two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
Two people facing unimaginable hardship, yet their paths diverge so drastically. Do you think their experiences with poverty really shaped their choices?
That's the question, isn't it? On the one hand, you see how desperation could lead someone like Raskolnikov to do something so awful and then try to justify it. But then you have Sonia showing us that poverty doesn't always lead to a loss of morality.
And we can't forget Svidrigailov. This guy is a whole other layer of the morality discussion.
Totally different approach to life. He's wealthy and powerful, but also kind of selfish and cruel. Preys on vulnerable women, and his relationship with Raskolnikov's sister Dunya is just unsettling.
Definitely adds another dimension to the whole morality theme. It's like he's almost tempting Raskolnikov with an easier but much darker path.
And his eventual suicide, it really makes you think. Can you find true happiness if you just cast aside morality altogether?
Yeah, like even with wealth and power, maybe true fulfillment needs something more, like compassion and responsibility.
So we have Raskolnikov struggling with guilt and his warped beliefs, Sonia holding on to faith in the face of unimaginable suffering, and Svidrigailov showing us what happens when you choose a morally ambiguous path.
Wow. And this is just the beginning.
Oh yeah, there's so much more to unpack.
We'll see how these contrasting characters impact Raskolnikov's journey as we dive deeper. We'll talk about his internal struggles, his interactions with everyone, and ultimately his decision to confess.
Okay, so Raskolnikov finally confesses. But is it really because he feels remorse, or is he just worn down by the whole mental torture?
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? You can tell he's going through it, but is he taking responsibility or just looking for some kind of relief?
Dostoevsky is so good at keeping us guessing. Even at the trial, Raskolnikov's attitude is all over the place. He admits to the crime, yeah, but he's also kind of detached, almost like he still thinks he's above the law somehow.
It's interesting how the whole legal thing plays out, He was so careful, so meticulous, covering his tracks. There's practically no physical evidence tying him to the murders.
Right. The prosecution basically has to build their case around his poverty, his weird behavior, even his writing.
They bring up that article he wrote about extraordinary men trying to prove he has this dangerous ideology.
Basically saying he's willing to use violence because he believes in it.
So it turns into this battle of ideas. Can you punish someone just for their thoughts, even if those thoughts haven't led to an actual crime?
Another one of those big questions Dostoevsky throws at us without any easy answers. How much do our beliefs really shape our actions? Where do we draw the line?
It's a lot to think about. And what about the other characters? How do they deal with Raskolnikov's confession?
Well, his mother is completely devastated, obviously. She loves her son, but she's also horrified by what he did. It's tearing her apart.
And Dunya, his sister, she's so fiercely protective of him.
But she also knows how serious this is.
Then you have Razumikin, his good friend. He never gives up on him, even through all of this.
He's the kind of friend everyone needs, you know? Someone who's always there, no matter how bad things get.
And, of course, we can't forget about Porfiry Petrovich, the guy investigating the case.
Oh, yeah, he was onto Raskolnikov from the start. But he wanted more than just an arrest, didn't he?
It was like he wanted Raskolnikov to understand the weight of what he'd done, to confess out of genuine regret.
They had some pretty intense conversations, didn't they? Almost like a psychological game of chess.
Porfiry was always pushing him, challenging his ideas, making him look inward.
In the end, he helped Raskolnikov face the truth about himself.
So eventually, Raskolnikov gets sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Siberia.
Yeah, and that's where things get even more interesting. The ending of the book is so ambiguous.
It's like Dostoevsky wanted us to keep thinking about it long after we finished the last page.
Does Raskolnikov really regret what he did? Does he find peace in suffering like Sonia believes? Or is he just accepting his fate?
And what about Sonia? She actually follows him to Siberia.
Talk about true compassion. She chooses to share his suffering.
It's like a tiny flicker of hope in this otherwise bleak and unforgiving environment.
But even with Sonia there, his path to redemption is definitely not going to be easy.
He's still haunted by his past, struggling with who he is now.
It's a long, painful process, and Dostoevsky doesn't sugarcoat it at all. He shows us how hard it is to truly change. We see Raskolnikov fighting his pride, his arrogance, all the things that led him down this path in the first place.
And on top of all that, he has to deal with the reality of prison life. It's brutal, it's full of suffering, he's lost his freedom. It forces him to face the consequences of his actions in a very real way.
He's stripped of everything, his intellect, his sense of superiority. He's just another prisoner now, subject to the same rules and punishments. It's a humbling experience, to say the least.
It really breaks him down and forces him to confront who he is at his core.
There's this powerful scene where Raskolnikov gets sick and has these vivid fever dreams.
Oh yeah, those were intense.
Mm-hmm.
They really revealed his deepest fears, his anxieties. It's like a nightmare world consumed by violence and chaos.
It's like everyone thinks they're above the law, and they use that to justify all kinds of cruelty.
It was a chilling vision of what could happen if everyone followed his twisted philosophy.
And I think in that moment, he realizes how dangerous his ideas really are.
It's also a big turning point in his relationship with Sonia.
Mm-hmm.
She nurses him back to health, shows him unconditional love and support.
It's like her faith finally starts to get through to him.
And it's through Sonia that he starts to understand what suffering really means. Not just as a punishment, but as a way to find redemption. So we've seen Raskolnikov go through so much, but does he really change in the end? Does he actually find redemption?
It's tough to say, really. Dostoevsky leaves the ending pretty open. We get these hints of change, maybe some remorse, but it's a very slow and uncertain process.
Like when he starts reading the Gospels, do you think that means he's having some kind of spiritual awakening?
Yeah, it could be. He also asks Sonia for forgiveness and admits the pain he caused. It seems like he's finally starting to accept what he did, understanding that he needs to make things right, not just with society, but with himself, too.
But there's still this feeling that he's not completely transformed. He's still grappling with his pride, his past, who he is at his core. Makes you wonder if true redemption is even possible after something so horrible.
And that's exactly the question Dostoevsky wants us to wrestle with. He doesn't give us easy answers or neat resolutions. He shows us the human mind and all its messy complexity, how powerful guilt can be, and the possibility, however fragile, of change.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish it, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It pushes us to think about big questions, about morality, justice, what it means to be human. It asks us to consider what real suffering is, what true repentance and forgiveness look like.
Well, this has been quite a journey. We've really dug deep into Crime and Punishment today, exploring the depth of Raskolnikov's psychological struggles, the impact of poverty and guilt, and the different moral paths represented by characters like Sonia and Svidrigailov.
And it's a story that doesn't offer easy answers, but that's what makes it so gripping. It encourages us to reflect on our own beliefs, our choices, our own capacity for good and evil.
We hope you've gained a new understanding of this incredible book.
We encourage you to keep exploring these themes, to ask yourself those tough questions that Dostoevsky raises, and to see how they connect with your own life and experiences.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into crime and punishment. We'll be back soon with another exploration of a complex and thought-provoking topic.